Nucleate is a global nonprofit organization that helps create new life science ventures and support the next generation of biotech leaders, which is why we're all here today. The organization was founded by, run by, and just really, I think, supported by. It's been amazing to see the growth over the handful of years that they've been around, by academic trainees, MBAs, postdocs, PhDs, and folks who are really excited about them. So they have chapters in more than 30 regions, over 120 academic institutions. If you aren't aware of them and you are in the academic system or want to support it and get more folks out of lab spaces and bringing their research into industry, I think it's definitely worth taking a good look at. So thanks again, Hannah, for everything you've done to make this possible.
Of course, thank you. And feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about Nucleate as well.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to this Inside VC, Breaking into Careers in Biotech Entrepreneurship and Venture. I am Susanna Harris. I'm the Director of Community at Breakout Ventures. We invest in seed to Series A stage companies that are building at that intersection of biology, chemistry, and technology. My role there is really to help identify new opportunities, work with our portfolio, and then I also run our fellows program, which allows other PhD students to get involved. And it's my absolute pleasure to be hosting and moderating this conversation. I'm going to go ahead and let the panelists introduce themselves because they will do a much better job than I can. But so everyone knows, we do have the Q&A section. Please feel free to drop any questions in there. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the next hour. And thank you to everyone who sent in your questions in advance. There's a lot of overlap, which is great. And then there's also so many amazing questions. I'm excited to kind of continue these conversations over time. So with that, maybe we'll start with Eric. Can you tell us just who you are, where you work, and what you do there?
Yeah, thanks, Susanna. And thanks, Susanna and Nucleate, for hosting this awesome session. It's great to talk to everyone here. My name's Eric. I'm a bioengineer by training and now tech and biotech investor by trade. I have been a lifelong scientist, grew up as a scientist, grew up in a very scientific household, and moved into the world of startups and investing a couple of years ago. Actually, I think 3 years ago at this point. I'm currently an investor at Dimension. We're a firm that's investing at the intersection of life sciences and technology. We got launched last year in February 2023 by 3 founders, and we're investing out of our $350 million Fund 1. We invest at two different broad areas. First is full stack drug discovery platforms, and second is the horizontal rails of biotech that enables all life sciences and drug discovery to become increasingly technology enabled, data centric, and ultimately more data driven in its core. That includes data infrastructure, machine learning operations, R&D software, and molecular tools. Always happy to talk more about that in one-on-one conversations if you'd like to follow up. Yeah, that's a little bit about me, but great to be here today.
So, and really exciting how much Dimension has done in just a couple of years. I don't think I realized even how fast that was. And then let's hop over to Natalie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie. I am the talent partner at Cantos Ventures. We are a pre-seed VC investing in deep tech, kind of expanding all across biotech, clean tech, hardware. Generally, we call ourselves deep tech to some extent, and mainly investing on technologies that we're hoping to really change the world in an impactful way. My experience has been in the recruiting space, primarily here in LA for the past 10 years. And I was kind of brought on to Cantos to handle anything HR recruiting related for the portfolio. And so, wasn't really a role that I thought even existed. And yeah, I mean, for free of charge, they kind of get to have me as, someone they can ask questions like, oh, like, how do you not get sued for discrimination? How do you pay someone? How much should I pay people? How do I engage with talent? Can I hire remote employees? And so it's been definitely a really interesting space to be in. And then on top of that, I think that the newest skill I got to learn at Cantos is, being part of the diligencing process and really assessing if founders kind of have what it takes to grow a team.
Great. Yeah, it's Cantos is fascinating with how broad your reach is. So I'm sure you talk to people kind of like all over the map, all different backgrounds. I think deep tech is a useful and a vague phrase for a very good reason because it's so expansive.
Yeah.
Yeah. Rahil?
Thanks, Susanna. My name is Rahil Haneef. I'm a principal at LifeSci Search and LifeSci Partners. Been here for about 5 years now. In LifeSci Partners, we're a life sciences platform ecosystem where we have an executive search arm broken into two different groups. One is C-suite board of directors. The other group, which I run, is much more on the investment capacity, whether it's venture funds, hedge funds, growth funds. As long as it's healthcare, life sciences oriented, that's kind of the remit that we stay in, from associate to managing partner. So could kind of breadth in regards to the seniority, but pretty deep into wanting to stay within healthcare. And then within the lifestyle partners, we have a high 8-figure venture fund. We have a banking group that does equity research and advisory deals, sell side deals, IPOs, and then we have an IR and a PR group as well. And so I work with those groups on venture related activities as well to make sure that we're staying cohesive across all 5 arms. So yeah, the way you can look at it as lifestyle partners, if you're starting a company at every inflection point, we want to have a service or a product that you can help utilize to get you to that next level.
Awesome. Yeah, that was actually helpful for me because I've always struggled to kind of explain the breadth of all that LifeSci Partners does. So
Yeah.
that's a good encapsulation. And then Yusuf.
Yeah. And then thanks for explaining that, Rahil. There's a going to talk about my background, but I can skip over LifeSci Partners because I actually came from LifeSci Partners as well, or LifeSci Search actually. But I'm Yusuf Uddin. I'm a scientist by training. Got my PhD from Georgia Tech. I was a structural biologist studying membrane proteins via cryo-EM. Got into executive recruiting maybe back in 2018, 2019. That eventually did that for a few years and then eventually landed into my current role at KDT Ventures. Been here for about 2.5 years as their head of talent. It's interesting because VC talent is an interesting space to be in. A lot of established VC firms have like a VC talent partner type of role, but in my opinion, it's not as common at the earlier stages of venture capital firms. And then the other caveat is a lot of people think that I recruit internally, like I recruit investors into KDT. That's not true, or it may be true for other talent partners, but for me, I am recruiting for our portfolio companies. And so to talk on KDT, we're an early stage venture capital firm. We invest at the intersection of compute, chemistry, and biology. We were founded in 2017. We've raised 4 funds so far. I think a little over 250 assets under management, 250 million assets under management. We've got about 65 portfolio companies, and it spans synthetic biology, platform therapeutics, drug delivery, digital health, health tech, med tech. Yeah, that's my background.
Wow, 65. So you're busy is what I hear. And so that kind of brings us to the next question, actually transitions in. Would love to hear from everybody kind of thinking about your career path to this point. What brought you here? And especially Yusuf, you kind of mentioned some of these things, but was there any kind of turning point for you that got you into that VC space?
Yeah. So for me, I really liked my field. Going back to PhD. So I really liked the science, but I think by year 2 or 3, I knew I didn't want to be a bench scientist long term. And so I wanted to. The common term is I wanted to trade the lab coat in for a business tie. And in my case, it's a metaphorical business tie because I think the last time I wore an actual tie in front of my colleagues was at a wedding. But anyways, so I didn't have any idea how to get into biotech or pharma. But I think year 3 or 4 of my graduate career, I joined a NIH-funded program called Broadening Experiences in Scientific Training. Took a bunch of PhDs and postdocs through several cohorts. We did workshops, events, training sessions, and just like explored alternative career paths outside of academia. Through that network, I met a few PhD students who got into executive recruiting. They were at a boutique executive recruiting firm in Atlanta. And that firm specialized in med tech and diagnostics. So I stayed in touch with them for the last 2 years of my PhD, had several conversations. Eventually, a seat opened up, and I jumped on it. And so the partner there was a director at Roche. He got pulled into 2 of the top 5 executive recruiting firms, Russell Reynolds first, and then Korn Ferry. So trained under him. He was also a venture partner at a growth stage venture capital firm called HealthQuest Capital. So initially I thought recruiting would be a nice segue to transition into one of the clients that we work with, but because a lot of our clients were med tech and diagnostics, I didn't really see myself going into that. Um, one first thing was first 6 months in, I decided that I really enjoyed the work and I wanted to build a career out of it. So to expand that client base, I joined LifeSci Search, which is where Rahil's from. And there I got a little bit more exposure to biotech and biopharma searches. And then I think 2022 was like a heyday for recruiters. They were breaking revenue numbers. And KDT reached out towards the end of that year, and they just asked to have a conversation. Over the next 3 or 4 months, we were chatting about their role for head of talent, and then eventually I jumped in. I was at a point in my career where I was ready to, in executive recruiting, you kind of come in at a research associate, senior associate. When you hit that principal partner level stage, you're in charge of bringing in clients into the firm. And to do that, you have to have a good network. And I saw KDT as a really good opportunity to network with founders and expand my potential client base if I decide to go back into like agency recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a huge theme throughout that whole thread, which is that those network effects and kind of that exploration of different spaces. And it's cool to hear how kind of these opportunities, one turned into another, turned into another. Rahil, kind of want to pop that same question to you.
Yeah. So I interned at like Morgan Stanley and Capital Group Finance, right? Where then I jumped into GQR, which was a human capital search group. And one of the earlier individuals there, when I joined, it was about 10 people. When I left, it was about 200. And so I helped build out the investment advisory practice, which was banking and investment related recruiting. But that was across healthcare and tech and oil and gas and consumer. So as I got more senior within GQR, I realized I wanted to get a little more specialized within my network, which is what kind of Yusuf mentioned, right? Like I didn't want to be a jack of all trades by the end of the career. I wanted to get a little more niche and know my space and know my interest. And so LifeSci, obviously, the hundreds of arms that I mentioned earlier, what we have, they're building out their search practice and realize that there's overlap there in regards to the gap that they can address with what they want for the portfolio companies, and allowed me to be very specialized within healthcare and life sciences. So that's kind of after 4 years at GQR, building out the LA and the New York office, I joined LifeSci to help build out their investment capacity on the search front. And kind of since then, I've been focusing purely on biotech, med tech, health tech. Now there's a new tilt of tech bio, right? Within healthcare as a whole is very broad, right? It's almost a generalist. It's not like there's new industries being created every single day, right? So I think for me, I have the interest there. LifeSci was able to leverage their expertise to what I was doing. And that's kind of what I've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years here.
Very cool. So that interesting, the jack of all trades situation, and a lot of our roles are at these intersections of a whole bunch of different things, expanding definitions. And I think that transitions well over to talk to Natalie. Want to hear about kind of where did you start? How'd you get here?
Yeah, no, I mean, Yusuf is probably the more interesting person here because he has a PhD, but I was also, a bio major in school. I was actually pre-med, obviously not a doctor, but, during the gap year I was, had planned on taking before going to med school. I kind of ended up like at a staffing agency, kind of thinking, oh, I'll just do this like part-time and until I do the med school stuff. I didn't tell like my boss at the time that I was actually like gonna go back to school. Obviously, I never went back. Um, but after that staffing agency, I actually interviewed at my first startup just by chance as a favor to a friend, and that was a deep tech company that went from under 20 people to 350 people in the course of 3 years that I was there. And so, I really took that risk, caught the startup bug, went to another startup that was also sub 20 people that grew to over 1,000 by the time I left a couple of years ago, over the course of 4 years through COVID. And so I think what I had done in both those companies was I was super open to learning everything. I wore so many different hats, from like the obviously it was, recruiting and helping the company scale, but I also took on onboarding. I also, like if they needed a receptionist, like part-time, I would do it. If they needed like someone to figure out how to do university recruiting, I traveled across the country, which was like super fun, but you would be sick like every fall, which was like not my favorite, but you learn it. It's not necessarily like a thing you want to do long term. I took on, recruited for roles that were looking for people that weren't in this country, and getting them interesting visas. And so yeah, I think by the time I got these two startups under my belt, my background became a lot more interesting to the VC world, and being able to apply that to the startups that we were working with. um, and yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah, like my main takeaway there is you learn everything. I love learning about every area that you could think of. And I know a lot of people, like, at a certain point don't want to be doing the lower level stuff, but honestly, it's what helped me get to where I am today, because people are like, oh, this person is willing to play ball and like wear a lot of different hats.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of, that startups have a lot of that. And then also I think all of us in the VC side, of course, there's a lot of little pieces. And if you can be that person to help pick them up. And Eric, I know you have some startup experience as well. I want to hear kind of your path.
Yeah. I was thinking about my answer. I had an answer written down, but actually my answer morphed as I heard everyone else's answer. And I think my kind of origin story into science and eventually life science technology investing started fundamentally at uh, who I am as a core individual and just my unhappiness with the world. So I think it's important to kind of frame that a little bit, which is that I think in order to be someone who's passionate about pushing the boundaries of technology, of markets, of people around you towards unseen kind of horizons in terms of company creation, of technology frontiers, in terms of building, I think, drugs that surpass every other drug that's ever been invented in history, you have to be fundamentally a dissatisfied an unhappy person. And I think that kind of dissatisfaction with the status quo and with kind of where I was at in life was always at the core of what drove me to become a scientist originally, and then eventually a life science investor. So I was a lab scientist at age 14. I've always loved science. Both my parents are scientists. I grew up in a scientific household. And I always wanted to find a way to push the boundaries of technology to do something that would be meaningful for people and hopefully make people's lives better. And I think it was in 2020 at the start of COVID where we were all locked out of our labs. I was a molecular biologist, tissue engineer at Penn at that time, doing a PhD. And it was at that time that I felt scared. I felt extremely dissatisfied with where the world was at. But I also saw a glimmer of hope in startups. I saw some of the technologies coming out of Catalin Carrico's lab from Penn and from bio+tech as a sign that biotech was a technology that come not only of age in terms of the existential fear that it might cause on one end in terms of highly viral contagion that was sweeping the world, but also offering a glimmer of hope into how we could leverage programmable medicines to counteract this virus in a way that was driven by science, technology, and the ability to just help people out. And that was one of the most inspiring moments of my life. It was at that time that I met Tony Colessa from Pillar Ventures. He was the first venture capitalist I ever met, and he convinced me very quickly in a 30-minute phone call to go into startups. And I never looked back since then. So I worked together with a couple of my colleagues at Penn, June Jun, and others at Penn to start what eventually first started as Penn Bio Launch, which was eventually became Nucleate Philadelphia. So we started that at Penn together, helped actionize technologies from labs, the great talent at Penn into early stage startups, and started working with Tony at Pillar as a part-time venture associate, worked with Chas Polito at Alix as a part-time venture associate, and then I got the call from Andreessen Horowitz to join their team on the bio+health team for BioFund 4, which is a 1.5 bill fund a year later. So it was an amazing journey from that year. And I left my PhD program and never looked back. So that's a bit about my journey.
Wow. I mean, something that hopefully people are catching on to is that it's not linear. None of this is linear, and it's finding whether it's the let's fix a problem or let's find a new thing. Whether you're excited about one direction, you go in a different, or either way. It's pretty cool to hear all of these different stories. And Eric, I want to stay on you for a second. So you talked about how a big impetus for you was, improving the lives of people, finding these solutions. Want to hear about just in general. So you've been in this industry in a couple different ways. Has there been any highlights? Are there any things that you're like, that is the thing that keeps me driving every day?
Yeah, every day is totally inspirational. I think the core of what it means to be in the world of technology and startups is you're interacting with this multidisciplinary intersection between technology, markets, and people. And ultimately, the role of the startup founder, the builder, or the investor is to kind of wrangle the intersectional complexity of people, technology, and markets into the future of product development, drug discovery, clinical development, biomanufacturing, whatever industry you're in. That's ultimately what we're doing. And I view the world of kind of startups as this fabric where you have different threads, which are comprised of novel technologies and gene editing or programmable medicines or small molecule discovery. People who are pulling those threads and weaving those threads into narratives and fabrics, which are the startup founders, and the markets, which are ultimately the vehicles by which you can do all this, right? And I think the intersection of all three of these things has always been really compelling to me, even from a young age. I didn't realize it at a young age. I found business pretty late in my life at age 28, but it was, I don't want to say it's late, but later in my life. And I've always been someone who's been deeply interested in science fiction and deeply interested in where the world is going. And I think seeing the startup world up close made me realize that this is a kind of job where you could be an endless student of how people think, how people behave, how technologies are pushed forward. And so there's not a day that goes by where I don't meet someone or encounter some idea that like leaves me working late into the night, 1 or 2 a.m. every day. So that's every day is inspiring.
And I think there's a fun question in the chat from Herschel of like, did you like the work that you did before finding VC, tried different things, found the path to it? Yusuf, I'd love to kind of tie that into any thoughts you have on like what's cool about the industry and how have you liked your path?
Yeah, so echoing the student for life thing that Eric said, I literally feel like that. I'm learning something new every day. I'm getting to, my favorite part is just meeting and talking to interesting founders, interesting candidates, learning about top innovative technologies that are coming to market. Also passively learning a ton from the investors on our team, learning how they evaluate certain companies, and then speaking to serial entrepreneurs, and figuring out like what makes their company a success or failure. And then I guess the thing that surprised me in VC, I guess it's not necessarily the most surprising thing. I think I kind of knew this, but it just was made abundantly clear. When you look at a company's like total spend, if you put that on a pie chart, um, usually the biggest chunk is employees, and so human capital is like one of the most important things for a founding company. And so a lot of founders, their strategies for growing their team in the very beginning stages is deploy their own network, and figure out who can we hire for their first scientist, who can we hire for our first like director of R&D. But then eventually that pool dries up, and then they will turn to their board or their advisors or their investor network. And then they may go to online strategies like marketing their jobs on LinkedIn or Indeed. Another strategy is to go to an agency or a search firm. And so I don't know, me being in this role as head of talent, the thing that I really enjoy is if I can make a placement for a founder and save them a ton of money, from money and time from doing a lot of these searches they have to work on, then it's a really rewarding feeling. So that's one of my high points of my job.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna have you flip over now and tell us. I'm going to jump to this, which is thinking about those high points and others. What do you see as the requirements of getting into the space of hitting those high points? What makes someone stand out to you with your background of when you're looking at people as an founder? I know you don't hire for KDT, but you see a lot of investors. I'm sure you talk to a lot of people who are asking those questions. And this is a question that just keeps coming up here in the chat, which is like, what skills are you looking for?
Yeah. This is a complicated answer, and it's too long, so I had to write notes out for this. But so it's kind of like a four-part answer. So if you're interested, if the audience members who are interested in getting into like a recruiter position like mine and Natalie's, I'll answer that first, and I'll make that the quickest. So I think the idea here is you pursue something that you like, and make a name for yourself. Recruiting is, in my opinion, is kind of oversaturated right now. There's a low ceiling to get into it. You don't need to be a PhD student, or you don't have to have a PhD. You don't need to be a rocket scientist, but it does help to differentiate yourself and like form a specialty, like Rahil was saying. So my focus was life sciences, biotech, pharma, medtech, diagnostics. Natalie, I think her background is she was a recruiter for the aerospace and transportation tech industry. So that suits a lot of the hiring that she does for Cantos. So yeah, that's my answer for recruiter. My answer for roles that I hire for at KDT, this is really a case-by-case basis. So I'm recruiting across the spectrum, like Natalie said, in her role. I do individual contributors, so scientists, engineers, to managers, to directors, VP, all the way to C-suite. We're doing a number of C-suite searches right now. So across, I also recruit across multiple functional areas. So if you're interested in a startup, more than likely you're going to be coming into the R&D functional area. But sometimes startups will recruit sales and marketing, business development or corporate development, finance, translational biology, computational biology, bioinformatics. And so again, most of our companies at KDT are very early stage. So a lot of times if I'm doing an individual contributor level role, it's scientists, bioinformaticians, machine learning engineers. But then we do also have some companies in our portfolio that that get to commercial stage pretty quickly. And then we also have some portfolio companies that are in the clinic right now. So that opens the door to sales, hiring, marketing, finance, reg affairs, clinical development, clinical operations. Those functional areas are important too. Third part of this answer is to stand out as an investor. This is just my personal opinion. I think Eric has the best answer here because he is the actual investor. But in my opinion, I think I go back to making a name for yourself, because I speak to a lot of PhD students and MD students and people wanting to get into VC. So I try to like look for patterns of like how did investors get into VC positions. I think, yeah, it's making a name for yourself, becoming an expert in a particular area, and then like forming your own thesis around it, and then doing like deep research in that area. So like just being at KDT, I've learned that like biomining is a thing. Antibody drug conjugates are getting popular. I took a course, I think a year and a half ago, on carbon sequestration. Cell and gene therapy is big, delivery modalities. Just pick your favorite topic or whatever you like, and then research companies in that space, learn the market, make educated bets on which companies might do well, and then kind of follow and track those companies. And then the second part to stand out as an investor is just networking and smart networking. So do a bunch of informational interviews, and don't do those interviews to try to get something out of that. It's just learn. And I just spoke to a friend last week who just joined a new fund. I think it's like a private equity. It's a dual private equity and venture capital fund. And she didn't really. It's not like she didn't believe me when I said to network, but she just didn't see how networking would translate to a position. But it literally worked out for her. She was in her last year of her PhD. She met with one of the managing partners. They formed a connection over the course of a couple months. She did an internship. When she finished her PhD, she reached back out to that managing partner, and then they pulled her in because they liked her. So yeah, networking is huge. I think the traditional way to get into like VC is you do a venture fellowship. You learn about investing under an investor. But I feel like that I call it the traditional method because I feel like everyone goes after that approach, and it works sometimes. But I think again, going back to differentiate yourself from the crowd, and then another analogous route that you can take if like VC is hard to get into. So another analogous route that you can take is consider strategic business development or corporate development. I know a lot of management consultants that go into that. But the one caveat there is if you go into like McKinsey or Bain or BCG or LEK, your clients there are going to have deep pockets. So you're oftentimes going to be working with like later stage life or later stage companies in general. So you still want to, if you're interested in early stage VC, you still want to have some node to the earlier stuff. And I think the last part of this answer, sorry if I'm taking too long. As a founder, to stand out as a founder, I think I spoke to a founder a couple days ago. His advice was, again, networking like hell. So he said, he was a scientist by training. He said, scientists are naturally introverted. I'm kind of introverted too. But he said, you got to break out of that. If you're going to be a founder or a CEO of a company, your main job is going to be sales. And if it's not near-term sales, maybe a bunch of grants, you don't have to worry about money. It's going to be sales in the long term, or else you'll get replaced. And companies need cash to stay alive. So your main job as a founder is to sell the story, sell the technology that you're building. I think that's the best tip.
Yeah, it sounds like with both the networking and the skills, it's about that, you know, I'm hearing like lots of different skills that are possible that you can dig into, but then it is that digging into, right? That it's you don't want to be surface level networking, surface level, you know, I know a little bit about everything. Um, cool. And Natalie, I mean, I know you talk to a lot of founders and a lot of people who are also getting into that operations side. Kind of what stands out to you when you meet somebody and they want to get involved, or what are you looking for when one of your portfolio companies comes to you and says, hey, we need this type of person, run with it?
Yeah, and a good question. And I agree with a lot of what Yusuf, said earlier, and that was super comprehensive. And so I think that when it comes to both the talent partner role and hiring for the portfolio and the founders themselves, there's really I would say like three or four things that really makes them stand out. And usually, and it's across the board because it's a profile that I'm sure all of us have seen, at least in this panel before, have seen, which is that they're super flexible. They want to learn everything. They're willing to take on tasks that maybe weren't in their job description. They're super resilient. They have had a lot of hurdles that they've gone through and can speak to them. They're super risk tolerant, and so whether that's in investing or taking on a role at a startup that they're a little bit unsure about, they're willing to take those risks in order to hopefully get that payout later down the road. And I think at the end of the day they have to be like really intentional about where they're going and like why they're doing certain things, whether it's collecting the right pieces of data in order to make an unclear decision become a little bit clearer. And as we all know, like in the world of startups, like you have to make so many decisions, and you do have to work with whatever data that you have, so that you are making the right calls. And so in terms of the founder themselves, I think it's like a slightly different profile, but it, usually they are really obsessed about team building, team culture. How do I grow? Even if they've never had that experience before, like they want to hear the podcast, they want to read the books, they want to apply that knowledge towards like actually building their company. And so if they have those pieces as I talk to them, usually it signals to me that they're wanting to build a good team.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to hear that you don't have to have every single skill to get going. Because it's I'm in VC in some aspect, and I'm like, oh, should I be here? But to kind of follow up on that, so Eric, would love to hear your thoughts on something that Natalie just said, which is that there are a lot of hurdles to overcome. You have to take risks. You have to be kind of tenacious. Are there any kind of moments that stand out to you? Is this something that you've experienced?
Yeah, I've had a lot of hurdles in my life. I think the biggest hurdle that I have identified in myself, and I suspect is true of everyone, is self-doubt. I think every hurdle in front of you is actually, I view it as kind of life's way of creating a test for you. And if you have the self-confidence and the follow through in terms of ambition and drive and just putting in the work, everything else follows. Your path will kind of reveal itself. But preceding all of that is your ability to get past the friction and the barrier to entry, the kind of energy required to get things started. And overcoming self-doubt precedes everything else. It sounds cliche, but I can't think of a single better skill that one can develop. Everything else will follow, but self-doubt and is crippling. I can think of a lot of instances that it's like getting past that self-doubt is what allowed me to have the confidence to go from being a PhD student in a lab to managing over $1 billion in the course of 12 months. So.
Yeah, and do you have any, was there anything for the folks in our audience who might also be in that experiencing self-doubt, any tips you have about kind of addressing that, approaching it, facing it?
I think it's the most important work you can do as an individual, whether as a founder, a scientist, an academic, an investor, is identifying your natural inclinations as an individual and where the world seems to be much clearer and more cogent and easier for you than everyone else you know. And if you can identify your superpowers as an individual, the things that seem like so natural to you, it's almost like breathing, but to others seem like it's magical to them. I think once you identify those things and work on allowing yourself to build maximum leverage from those superpowers, the world starts to look a lot different. Of course, there are always going to be things that you're not good at and need to work on, and it's important that you recognize what those are too, and work on those such that they don't enable you from accomplishing the breadth of your potential and depth of your potential from your natural superpowers, but focus on identifying your superpowers and allowing yourself to benefit maximally from those superpowers. And I think in turn, everything else follows.
I love that, the allowing yourself to benefit from those superpowers. It's that like appreciation for what you are really good at. Rahil, want to hear from you. You talk to a lot of people and a lot of folks who are getting into that venture space, or actually, might be a little further along, especially as you're talking to people who maybe are further along. What challenges do you see in people in general as they are moving up in this kind of career path?
I guess it comes down to, I mean, it's a pretty, I guess, boring answer, but I'd say just the scarcity of the roles, right? I think like that's a big obstacle, the fact that people of these backgrounds, they want to break in, but there's only so many biotech funds or tech funds that are hiring, right? They don't hire seasonally or cyclically, right? They're very like reactive as to why they're coming on board. Are they replacing someone? Are they trying to address a specific gap in their current investment team, right? So I think that's probably the biggest obstacle that a lot of individuals see in order to break in, because they have all the right backgrounds and the right phenotypes and the right accomplishments, right? They've been the top of their game since high school, right? If you look at their backgrounds, but then you go out to the recruiting front and it's like there's 20 individuals who've been top of the league their entire lives. So how are you going to break into that? And it just comes down to doing your diligence, right? Like almost finding out what you have exposure to, what you have reps in, right? Like you look at specific, you map out all the funds you want to break into. It's a very easy way to see, hey, who's investing, right? Find out who the partners there, right? What are their backgrounds? Did they go to the same PhD program? Did they go to the same MD program? Did they and look at yourself, like if you had a PhD in oncology, find out funds that are investing in oncology, right? It's almost kind of having a bespoke approach to all these funds, because that's the way that resonates, right? They want to hire like-minded individuals who they could teach and they could help mentor to be the next level, right? So there's no like, it's annoying because there's no like, it's not algebra, it's not one true formula, solve for X and that's how you get into a VC. That's not how it works, unfortunately. There's many capable individuals who are, again, more than capable to do well in venture, but they just don't approach it in the right way. And so, like I said, reverse engineer your interest, reverse engineer your experience. If you're consulting for a specific company, find their competitors who invested in those companies, right? And then go reach out to those founders, those partners. And so, yeah, it's kind of it seems like a lot of heavy lifting, but there's not that many players out there, right? And if you do want to break in, it's not easy work. So that's kind of the way I would say to, like, I guess, view this. The biggest obstacle is just the pure scarcity of it and how to like differentiate yourself to address that.
Yeah, that actually leads us right into a question that we are getting so many questions about, which is thinking about transitions. So you kind of mentioned it, breaking into these spaces. Kind of the visual I have in my head is like a smaller pond and bigger fish at the same time. And so want to keep it here with Rahil about when you've seen people make those transitions, or whether that is from uh, a lot of people who are saying I'm a PhD student and I'm interested in founding a company and becoming going into venture, but then also this question around what if you are coming from a different type of background? What if you're in the tech side and you want to go to biotech, or you're more in software and you want to go to life science? Like, how do you manage those types of transitions?
I mean, it's not easy, but I think you got to be proactive about it, right? You can't be reactive and expect it to fall towards you. You got to be proactive on it. Unfortunately, the barrier of entry towards biotech and tech is high because it requires specific knowledge and skill sets, right? Um, I couldn't just talk about going and start talking about like tumors or anything like that, right? I don't know like the science behind that. So you got to learn enough about a certain area or therapeutic area or technology to break in. And so I guess the way to look at it, if you don't have that background, you want to break into the background, you look at it in three different, I guess, categories, depending on where you are in your personal and professional life. Is you look at it professionally, right? If you're at a certain company, whether it's consulting or at a specific, I guess, a larger corporate, try getting onto projects, or try getting consulting gigs at the industry that you want to break into, right? I think that speaks volumes because that allows you to empathize with like the issues that go on with innovation in that specific vertical, right? So you look at it in a very professional way, get that exposure professionally. And if you're still in academia, and let's say you have like an English lit background, and that's your major, that's fine. And you don't have to be a pre-med or have like a biology background, but join biology clubs and join like the editorial for your university, and write and review different articles within the space, right? Like, be proactive academically to make sure if you don't have that major, do what you can to reference that you want to break into that major, right? I think you mentioned this earlier. The third category is the social aspect, right? It's networking at the end of the day, right? It's the right conversation at the right time. You got to go to these happy hours and these cocktail hours and these events that we all dread to talk about what's your commute to work and what's the weather like. But then once you get past those 3 or 4 cold questions, you start building that rapport. And I think what you mentioned, like, it started off with a casual chat with his friend who's at his PhD or at her PhD program. She finished it and then she ended up joining because she knew the managing partner to call, right? So put yourself out there in the situation. No one wants to be there at the end of the day. No one likes these small talk cocktail hours. But it's a necessity, right? So, like, no matter where you are in your career or your personal life, I think those are 3 categories you need to address to break in if you don't already have that explicit background.
I like how that ties in also to kind of what Eric has said about those superpowers. Some of these things are just going to stick with me forever. Of that combining, figure out what you're really good at, dig into the things that you're not, get that experience, build new superpowers. And then also, there's aspects of the job that are just not fun for most people, or not fun for anybody. We heard earlier, like, a lot of people in these spaces are scientists by training or scientists at heart, and networking is scary. A lot of us are introverts. So cool it's nice to hear that from other people. They say it out loud, that they might also get out of the Uber and look at the door and go, like, maybe I should get back in the Uber. That'd be nice. Um, Natalie, you've kind of done some of this transition yourself as well. I mean, it's not you've moved out of a field, but you've just sort of like expanded in so many ways. Um, how has that transition gone for you? Do you have any tips for other people?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, I think when it comes to recruiting, how you apply the skills that you have when it comes to like reaching out to people and using their psychology and having that EQ to understand what motivates people is pretty transferable. And I could definitely say the same about a lot of other roles. And I think I saw in the Q&A there that a lot of people are asking about like what roles they could possibly transition into. And to Rahil's point earlier, clearly there are roles that you definitely need to go back to school for to get the specific knowledge and experience. But there's other roles like in the operational side, like chief of staff or PM or even like BD roles, because a lot of those things can be transferable into other industries that aren't necessarily like what you studied in. But I think what it would take is a little bit of sacrifice, right? Whether that's taking a pay cut, it's a lateral move, or maybe it's a step down in order to like be able to, move on a couple of steps above. And I've seen it before in the startups that I've been at, where actually the craziest transition I've ever seen is like our office manager at the last startup that I was at is now the head of people at this company now that it's like a 1,200 person company, and she is doing amazing. She's currently getting her MBA. Like she has like such close ties to the company, and so when you know you can totally go into a department that you're like, this isn't necessarily the long term thing that I want to do. It's a lot easier for you to really prove yourself and then start building those connections internally within the company so that you can go into the role that you ideally want to be in long term, or gain those skills so that you can transition into that as your next role.
Mm. Yeah, and so with that, I'm hearing a lot about experience. One question that we get a lot, and we're getting a lot in here, is what's the importance of coursework or fellowships or getting that experience, or just throwing yourself into a company and seeing where you go? Do you have advice for people who are kind of balancing these options?
Yeah, there's nothing like hands-on experience. I'm sure everyone here will hopefully agree to that. The more hands-on that you can get and like learning, I learned the most when I made the most mistakes, and I wouldn't have been able to get that experience unless I just took the risk and like made that move. So I know it's scary in terms of just making that jump, but uh, I that has been like the highlights of my own career is making the jumps and like taking the risks. And if you're confident, if other people are advocating for you, like you're not going to be unemployed for very long.
That's a really lovely thought, and I think it's very true. Rahil, is there anything you would add to that? You've seen a lot of folks, especially later stages. Where do you rank things like coursework versus the fellowship versus internship, et cetera, that sort of spectrum?
Yeah, I think they're all important, right? I think I'm seeing the chat, a lot of people asking very specific questions like what can they do, right? So like to lay it out in I guess the obvious break in, I guess not obvious, the proven path to break into VC, not guaranteed, but a proven path is there's different roles as in equity research, right? You get an equity research position, you diligence the relevant companies. That's a very relevant skill set to break into venture capital. There's also consulting, right? You look at the big three, Bain, McKinsey, BCG. They have very high profile clients they work with, and you work on very cool and diligent projects. But there's also smaller consultancies like that are very life sciences or healthcare focused, whether it's Clearview, whether it's IQVIA, whether it's LEK. Those types of consultancies, the projects you're diligencing those clients of yours in ways that VCs find relevant because the portfolio companies want to get to that stage, right? So you can empathize with the work and how to get there and how to avoid these pitfalls that they're joining. I think that's a very relevant skill set. You look at investment banking, right? It's you are working on transactions that are very relevant towards these venture funds and the exit goals and the cash events, right? So you're working on very relevant transactions. Startup experience, right? I think whether you're in your PhD program or undergrad or working full time, like start consulting with startup companies, right? Understand what itches need to be itched, right? I think all those are very specifically tangible, relevant things to do to try to break into, to transition into, that could get you the best shot or an obvious shot to at least interview for these venture funds. And if you're on a PhD program or an MD, I think they would love to interview you. It's just about getting the getting in front of the right individual to get there. And I think when it comes to the mindset, the biggest thing I'd say is it's subtle, but I think it's very important, is you should be a scientist who happens to be an investor and not an investor in the sciences. I think, and that's a very subtle difference in regards to how to look at it, right? Because if you're just an investor and you're looking at it very transactionally, I think the science and the tech space is very specific, where they're not just like looking at deal, right? They have horizons that are 6, 7, 8, 9 years down the line, right? So you need to be truly like deep into having that humility to learn more and be curious, right? You look at Garheng Kong, who runs HealthQuest, or Rod Wong, who runs RTW. They're investors. They run multi-billion-dollar funds because they love to learn more. Like, simple as that. I think Eric said that as well. I think that's what drives them, the innovation, the humility to understand that they want to learn more. I think have that mindset and you'll be fine. Obviously, do what you can to position yourself in the best way to break in. Like I said, those aforementioned paths, and that's kind of, I guess, something that they look for in order to, I guess, bring them on board.
Awesome. Yeah, I think something you said was specifically tangible, relevant experience, which is, I think those together could be its own whole panel. But we have like just a couple more minutes, so I want to ask rapid fire question for everybody, which is, if you could go back 5 years and you had 30 seconds to talk to yourself in the past, what advice would you give yourself about building your career? And we'll start the same order that we started out this whole thing with. We'll go with Eric first.
Yeah. Take on more risk and don't do things that don't feel right to you. Just say no or quit. Do things that you really enjoy doing and take on more risk.
Amazing. Love that. Imagining your past self like, oh, okay. All right, we'll pop it over to Natalie.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that embracing networking. I know I'm a recruiter and I'm supposed to like love networking, but not necessarily. And also networking outside of the industries that I was already working at, because you learn so much more. You gain advocates. You end up building a really nice community for yourself that will stick around for the long haul.
Absolutely. It's a great place to do it too. Rahil?
Yeah, I think I just double down on what Eric says, take the risk, right? As long as it's within reason. I think you want to take risks that you find interesting, because I think it's a win-win, right? You take the risk and it succeeds, you're successful in that capacity. If you fail, you learn quite a bit that you can reference it down the line for the next time. So there's no downside on taking risks. I think you have to be very calculated, but definitely push and take risks.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then Yusuf?
Yeah, so be open-minded, humble, respect people, and then listen. I think it's really important when you're starting out in your earlier in your career. Just be a really good listener. And if you're transitioning away from bench science into a completely new industry, just got to get comfortable with potentially, Natalie said this, potentially taking the lowest rung on that ladder. And if you're actually as good as you think you are, then you will progress quickly. And if you don't, then take what you learned from that experience and jump to the next company. But eventually you want to find a team of people that has the same values as you and is creative and thoughtful. And you want a team that respects you just as much as you respect them. So I think that's my advice.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for coming. We're right at time, and I think there's more questions that we could answer in the next 3 hours. So for everybody listening, thank you for joining in. Thank you to our panelists. For anybody who's interested, again, we're going to send a follow-up email so we can get feedback from you about how we can do this again. Is there anything else you're excited to learn about? There'll be information about our panelists, and there's also going to be a little form that, if you are interested in engaging with us, with one of our firms, fellowships, other opportunities, taking those risks, jumping in, networking, building relationships, if you're interested, you're just going to let us know. So thank you, Eric, Natalie, Yusuf, Rahil. Really great to talk to all of you. And I'm excited. I'm glad we get to work in the same space.